This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
At T. Rowe Price, our curiosity lights the way to help you plan ahead for what matters to you most. Work directly with us, and together, we can help uncover the right investments for you at every stage of your life, whatever your goals. That's the power of curiosity. Better questions, better outcomes. T. Rowe Price. Invest with confidence. Visit troweprice.com/investdirect to learn more.
Hello, I'm Dana Stevens, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Anora Pole Dances to the Oscars conversation. It's Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024, and on this week's show, we will be discussing Anora, the new film from writer-director Sean Baker about a Brooklyn sex worker who gets involved with the son of a Russian oligarch and winds up, to quote the title of an old Michelle Pfeiffer movie, married to the mob. It won the top prize at Cannes this year. It's also now a frontrunner in the Best Picture Oscar conversation. Second, we're taking on Matlock, not the 1990s Andy Griffith starring legal procedural, but a brand new CBS network show that's a gender-swapped reboot starring Kathy Bates as the down-home trial lawyer. And finally, we'll talk about Hearing Things, a new online magazine that's trying to revive and maybe reinvent music criticism on the web. I'm joined today by Stephen Metcalf, who's remote from somewhere. Where are you, Steve?
I am back in my old stomping grounds. I'm in Ghent, New York, at a dear friend's house.
Ah, the land of pie stands.
We get upstate Steve, a little infusion of upstate Steve. All right, we're going to see how that stirs the brew today.
Yeah.
That's actually fitting for Matlock. He can be our folksy, our representative of folksiness for the week. And joining us from LA, where she's a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism, is our beloved Julia Turner. Hey, Julia.
Hello, hello.
And on to Anora. The indie filmmaker Sean Baker has made 8 films now, with the best-known titles being the last 3, Tangerine, The Florida Project, and Red Rocket. His movies have often taken place on the margins of society, many of them focusing on sex work. In fact, when Anora won the Palme d'Or at Cannes this year, Baker dedicated the award to sex workers everywhere. Anora tells the story of Annie. Her full name is Anora, but that doesn't become important till late in the film. She's a stripper from Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, who early in the film dances for a client named Ivan Zakharov. Ivan, or Vanya, turns out to be the son of a Russian oligarch. He's obscenely wealthy, he's inexhaustibly horny, and he's eager to throw money at Annie to hire her as his pretend girlfriend. After they take a whirlwind trip to Las Vegas together, their relationship starts to become something more than that of sex worker and client, which is when Vanya's powerful family calls in the security team of large men they've hired to keep an eye on their wayward son. In this clip, you'll hear Mikey Madison, who plays Anora, meeting Ivan for the first time in her strip club. The young playboy, who's played by the Russian actor Mark Adelstein, has been foisted upon her because Annie speaks Russian, sort of.
I'm Иван, and ты можешь назвать меня просто Ваня.
Vanya, okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Annie.
Yeah, not bad. And ты должна знать русский, правильно?
No, I don't speak Russian, but I know Russian.
В смысле?
I can speak Russian. I just prefer not to, but you can go ahead and speak Russian. I'll understand.
I don't understand. What the fuck?
All right, Steve, I'm going to start with you. I believe, if I remember right, that you were a big fan of The Florida Project, which I know we talked about on this show a few years ago. Am I remembering that right? And tell me how you feel about Sean Baker's latest.
You're absolutely right. I loved The Florida Project. I remember it pretty clearly as being my favorite movie of that particular year, and it made me want to see all of Sean Baker's movies. I went in to Anora knowing nothing about it other than it was Baker's latest. I didn't know the premise, didn't know anything about the cast. I scarcely knew that it had won Cannes, Dana, only because you mentioned it on our topics call. I have an entirely subcritical response to this movie. I loved it with all my heart and my soul, from my head down to my toes. I was so enwrapped by it. I was transfixed by it. It has all the hallmarks of the Florida Project and apparently Baker's other movies. It's highly immersive. It's very real feeling. You feel as though you're eavesdropping or spying on an actual world. And of course, it shows deep social empathy towards the plight of the downtrodden, especially sex workers. And I scarcely know how to marshal a critical response to it. I mean, first of all, during the entire course of the movie, it was the oddest kind of genre confusion of, am I watching a comedy or a tragedy? Am I watching like a crushing, spirit-crushing social satire, or am I watching a kind of screwball farce? And the answer was both, and not in a, like, there's not an ounce of like winking or cleverness or self-consciousness about this genre busting. It is just, it has its own inherent truth, the truth of these characters that's expressed both through comedy and tragedy, and often at the same time. The performances, Mikey Madison in particular, of course, are mind-blowing. And then when the film ended, so my first thought was, that's the best American movie I think I've seen in 25 years. Certainly among them. I don't know that I would be able to think of another that I admired more as I sat there during the closing credits. And the second thing is, the movie theater was full. This blew away per screen records, as I understand it, house records. But everyone was just seated, completely silent, as they had been, other than laughter, the whole 2 hours. And they were processing what they'd just seen. I suppose I'll have more to say as we go, but I was floored by this movie.
It's funny, Steve. A couple of things you just said echoed an experience I've now had twice, because I've seen this twice in theaters. And I think my review of it ends with the words, "The audience sat in awed silence." There was a very similar transition from, whooping and laughing. And I mean, all the kind of gasps and, the reactions that you have to a movie that in a way is a thriller and a rom-com and a movie that's there to give you pleasure and excitement. And the ending, which, we absolutely won't give anything away about, but the ending is not quite a twist. It's more of a tonal shift that I think works beautifully and also left the audience sitting in complete silence. And it doesn't at all surprise me that this movie did better for a limited release movie than any movie has done this year, because I think whatever happens with, awards conversations, et cetera, who knows? But I think it's just going to be a big word of mouth hit because audiences love it. And this whole weekend sort of followed the conversation about Anora as it developed, because I actually interviewed Sean Baker and his wife, Samantha Kwan, who's also a co-producer and creative partner on the movie and all his movies. I got to interview them after a screening of Anora this past weekend and got the sense from them that, they're seeing what it's like. These indie filmmakers are seeing what it's like to have a big monster hit that is actually going to burst the bounds of, that like art film world. So that kind of warms the heart as well. Okay, Julia, on to you. Anora, it sounds like you need to sprinkle a little cold water on Steve here. To the best movie in 25 years?
I mean, I maybe like one with a little mister. I'll take a little mister at him. I mean, it's a very good movie. I guess I just would worry about hyping people's expectations so much that they can't just enjoy it on its own terms, which was a little bit my experience. I came in being like, oh, this is supposed to be the greatest movie of all time. And then it was a really rich and great movie. But I sort of wish I'd heard less about it coming in. I mean, one of the things I love about it, in addition to feeling like you've just been dropped in a world that pre-exists you, and I think we should talk a little bit about the craft of how that is executed, because it's so expertly done and so subtly done. It's also interested not just in the labor conditions of sex workers and class position of sex workers, but the labor positions and class conditions of goons and thugs. Mm-hmm. The goons and thugs also become characters for whom you have deep human empathy, and they're buffoonish, but also they have groundedness and precision and pathos in varying degrees and flavors. And the kind of quiet, patient humanism of the movie that just sort of lets all of this cacophony unfurl and then is just still there watching the humans underneath all the franticness is incredibly beautiful. I also loved the Florida Project. I think we all did when we talked about it. We were kind of over the moon for it. And I'm trying to think about, apart from the obvious subject of sex work, it's not just the thematic interests that make a Sean Baker movie feel so distinct. There's this kind of conscious decision to go to worlds that are not frequently the worlds that are depicted on screen, to deliver them in this grounded way. And I'm curious, Dana, actually, since you had the opportunity to interview Baker, like, what did you pull out of that conversation, and or your own critical observation of like how does he do this? How does he do this? It feels like a magic trick.
I know. I wish I'd had more time to get into that with him, because if I was doing a real interview for print with him, I would have asked really detailed questions about his process. Like, how long do you rehearse? I did sort of ask him that, but I would really get into the nitty gritty of like, do you do table reads? Because Steve is absolutely right that this world feels so complex and so coherent. Like every actor is in the same movie, which is a relatively rare achievement. It's a true ensemble feeling cast. And in that way, even though the subject matter is different, it reminded me a bit of a filmmaker that I know Sean Baker admires a lot because he's talked about him, which is Mike Leigh. It had a similar sort of horizontal, slice of American life that it was looking at. So that even, Steve, this one word that you used in your initial gush of praise about the movie that strikes me as slightly off is downtrodden, because I don't think Annie really is downtrodden in a way. I mean, he's looking at the margins, Sean Baker is, but he also finds so much, joy and buoyancy in that world. Yeah. And the strip club scenes really are the opposite of the sort of, I guess the standard Hollywood way of showing a strip club as a place that's sordid and misogynistic and demeaning toward women. I mean, not that those things can't exist within that context. And there is, referral to one client who's creepy. We don't see him, but who reminds the strippers of Jeffrey Dahmer, they say. I mean, there's certainly a sense that there is danger that could lurk right in this space, but there's also just life happening there, and those scenes are so full of life and of a kind of neutral observational eye that I really admired them. But yeah, Julia, I asked him a few things. I asked him and Samantha Kwan, who I think scouts locations with him, about location and sense of place, because I really admired how this movie takes place in a very specific milieu, which is this sort of Russian American and Armenian American world of Brighton Beach, without ever laying on the local color too thick. It doesn't get cutesy about it or have sort of endless establishing shots of Coney Island. You just are there and you feel like you're kind of in the bowels of that world. And part of the way I think they did that, and this is a very Mike Leigh style tactic, is that they bunkered down and I think lived for a few months in Brighton Beach, scouting locations and figuring out the feel of what they wanted to shoot. And all of that just comes out in how kind of organically this world is explored throughout the movie.
Yeah. I mean, also just the set choice of the specific fuckboy mansion that the little oligarch princeling lives in. Like, I would read 5,000 words on like how they found and dressed that mansion. It's a very specific. What I love about it is that it so represents the aspiration of luxury of that community. And it's very different than Succession luxury. It doesn't mock that vision of luxury. It's not judging it. It's just a very specific, different version of what the Cinderella castle would look like. It's an amazing set.
Yeah, Julia, if you were still an entertainment editor, I would say assign that piece. I want somebody to talk about all the location scouting for Anora.
I just the headline "Fuckboy Mansion" would get me to subscribe. But so absolutely, downtrodden was the wrong word, and there scarcely could be a less, in some senses, downtrodden. She's socially vulnerable, but she's not downtrodden. The Mikey Madison, the title character, Anora. But it's funny, at one moment when I was sort of thinking about, okay, how can I turn my subcritical response into a critical one? And I don't think I quite did it, but I was thinking about that Yeats poem, which is in one sense completely inapt, right? Leda and the Swan, because it's about, the rape of a human woman by a god. But that last line, like, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent beak could let her drop? That last line, before the indifferent beak could let her drop. And there is a way in which this gigantic thing heaves into her life and she mistakes it as a human, right? But in fact, it's a god in some sense, right? She mistakes the person in front of her as simply scaled to the reality that they are sharing together. And what the movie does such a good job of doing is allowing one to believe that before heaving into view comes the godly world of the ultra rich father. But in the meantime, like, I don't want to give anything away. I mean, everyone listening to this, I assume, is going to go see this film and should. I also think it's going to be a huge hit. But the moments in which she is supposed to play a passive victim and what she actually does is so fucking wonderful. And her utter toughness and resilience and capacity for violence when necessary is so unbelievably cathartic. And it leads to something that I also don't want to give away that plays out mostly in the eyes of one character over the course of the film. I have never seen better eye acting in my life.
Agree. Can we do body part Oscars and just do an Oscar for just the eyes of that actor?
And when you start to notice it, you're like, is this going to go ... question mark. And all I can say is that the filmmaker and that actor were completely in control of what was happening the whole time. And it pays out in ways that are truly, it's like both gutting and exhilarating at the same time.
One other bit I wanted to add just to how the film delivers the realism is that any stripper colleagues are played by actual strippers, an interesting array of stripper actresses who consulted on the film. Rachel Handler has a great piece about this for Vulture, which is worth checking out too after you see it. But sort of the kind of rhythms of the strip club, the lingo of the strip club, the approach of these strippers, which include one of the strippers who's been unionizing some strippers out here in LA, which is a story that has been interesting to follow and gets at some of those questions of labor and class and sex work that the film is obliquely interested in. I think that I would like to read the analogous piece about how the Armenian American thugs were cast and from what world. But the work that went into the realism here, I think, is really admirable. And it's just a great film.
I can tell you one thing about the Armenian Americans, which is that Karen Karagulian, who plays Toros, the sort of smarter of the two Armenian brothers, he is a long-time collaborator. I think he's been in every one of Sean Baker's movies and is really a creative collaborator with him too. And in fact, the two of them together years ago, I think before their last movie was made, said, let's make a movie set in Brighton Beach. Let's make a movie about this world. So this is kind of the realization of something the two of them came up with a while back. All right. Anyway, it's Anora. It's in limited release right now, but I predict based on how much audiences are loving it that it will soon be in a theater near you. So keep your eye out for it and tell us what you thought at culturefest@slate.com.
As the weather turns cooler, it's really nice to look forward to football games, curling up with the latest book, maybe in front of a fireplace filled with candles, or I'm right now frolicking in the leaves of upstate New York and reaching for your favorite cozy sweater from Quince. This is 100% Coinky. I really mean it. I am currently wearing a Quince item that I just received in the mail. It is a European linen long sleeve shirt in the ever-fetching martini olive color. I love this shirt. I'm so glad it accompanied me upstate. It's unseasonably warm, so the linen is perfect for that. But it's a nice, solid linen fabric for when it gets cooler at night. Quince is known for many other things, including their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And it's not just that. All Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. That includes beautiful leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim, much, much more. How are they able to do that? By partnering directly with top factories, cutting out the cost of the middlemen, which passes the savings on to us, to you and me. Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And of course, premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/culture for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
Since 1981, Justin has been producing world-class Bordeaux-style wines from Paso Robles on California's Central Coast. As the pioneer of Paso, Justin wines are what put Paso Robles on the winemaking map. With a rich history of accolades, Justin produces exceptional wines and is proud to be America's #1 luxury Cabernet. I've mentioned before on the show that Justin very generously sent me a couple bottles of 2 different kinds of their wines. It was a real treat to get to taste them. I specifically want to recommend their Isosceles Bordeaux blend, which comes in a fun triangular box. It's very tasty and is on the possible list for our Thanksgiving house wine. Enjoy exceptional wine all season long with Justin. Whether it's for seasonal celebrations, festive dinner parties, or gift exchanges, Justin Wine is sure to make your holidays memorable. Pick up Justin Wine today at a store near you, or visit justinwine.com and enter Gabfest20 for 20% off your order. Justin offers the perfect holiday gifts for clients, colleagues, friends, or family. Be sure to check them out at justinwine.com to receive 20% off your order for a limited time. The premiere of the CBS reboot of the venerable legal show Matlock got better ratings than any new show on the network in over 5 years. This is a phenomenon worth noting given that network television is generally assumed to be a viewing mode in steep decline. Although it's also worth noting that in addition to airing weekly on CBS, Matlock will also be viewable on their streaming platform, Paramount+. In this show, created by Jenny Snyder-Urman of Jane the Virgin fame, Kathy Bates plays Madeline Matlock. No relation to the seersucker-clad Andy Griffith hero of the old show, and we'll get to that, but rather a lawyer returning to the practice of law after a 30-year gap in her resume. She explains to her new boss that she needs the job desperately because she's been left destitute by her cheating husband to raise her 12-year-old grandson on her own. But is Maddie's sob story the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let's begin with a clip from the pilot. In a bid to win the job, Maddie Matlock, played by Kathy Bates, has slipped into a meeting of the white shoe law firm Jacobson Moore, and she's about to offer some insider information about a settlement negotiation.
Then how do you know the number?
Well, you see, there's this funny thing that happens when women age. We become damn near invisible. Oh, not that I'm complaining. I had my moment in the sun. Plus, it's useful because nobody sees us coming. That's how I got through your security. Several times. And it's also how I knew that Peabody's counsel grabs coffee and updates his client between 8:15 and 8:25.
What's the number?
Am I hired?
No one is hired without a 2-week trial. What's their ceiling?
$23 million, which means I just made you $4 million.
All right, Julia, I'm going to start with you for the reason that I know that you're a longtime consumer of the network legal procedural. You're a Law and Order fan. I know that you kind of enjoy the comforting format of a case per week, which this show partly is and partly isn't. So I want to hear your feelings about Matlock. And if you have any knowledge or memory of the old Matlock with Andy Griffith, I'd love to hear about that too.
I have really been enjoying this Matlock. Kathy Bates, I don't think we're breaking revolutionary critical ground here if we advance the idea that Kathy Bates is a wonderful actor. But Kathy Bates is 76, which I didn't know and wouldn't have guessed. In all of our conversation this year about how old people should and shouldn't be when they take on different jobs, obviously star of CBS procedural has a different kind of geopolitical gravity than President of the United States. So I'm not wanting to stretch this analogy too far, but it's just a good reminder that like people in their 70s could be incredibly vital and capable from time to time. It's just fun to see her own this role, which is borrows from my understanding of the original Matlock, a show of which I was not a regular watcher, a kind of theatrical, understated but overstated cornpone charm. I get the sense that that's what she's doing. You heard a little bit of it in that clip, and, you know, makes herself the nucleus of this procedural, which I think is really interesting to see a legal procedural done from the showrunner of Jane the Virgin, a show that I admired and watched some of, but was not a pilot to finale consumer of. But there's a funny tonal mix here of kind of drippy weekly caper and driving serial narrative, which we can't talk too much about without spoiling the big twist in the pilot. But I was very charmed by it, but I'm very curious what you non-network, non-procedural watchers think.
Oh, it's funny that you kind of liked it and you only have quibbles. I hated the show. I mean, I didn't enjoy watching it at all. I have some sympathy for Kathy Bates, who's terrific in everything, including this, and deserves a huge payday, which apparently she's going to get. The show's a hit. To me, it was interesting only as a reminder of how far we've traveled in the last 20 to 25 years in the history of TV, which obviously used to be a 3 or maybe 4 network oligopoly whose business model was just aggregating the very largest audiences possible. And so some kind of lowest common denominator, to be somewhat insulting about it, was key to the biggest kinds of successes. And then the business model fragmented, and that stayed essentially the way that it was. And you got premium cable, and then you got streaming, and you moved away from ad-driven story beats and rhythms, and you got more supposedly select, or I don't know, what do you want to call them, discriminating audiences. And, I haven't watched a network TV show in probably close to those 20 years. And to go back is so bizarre. It's this sort of way back journey into kind of very corny humor, super obvious dramatic beats, melodramatic cliffhangers at the ad breaks, totally uncompelling, unnuanced, a little too good looking actors. Everything's kind of telegraphed. And then we don't want to give away the actual twist. It turns out to be a cake and eat it too project. As Julia says, it's going to be both the classic old standalone episodes, which always had implied in it selling into syndication so that you could just catch one on, rerun without having to know a larger story arc. And this kind of hint at a darker, more sort of peak TV storyline that's a long arc. I don't think these two things went together at all. They're very jarring. Everything about the show, up to the twist, everything about the show was just screamingly improbable. It bore no relationship whatsoever. None. Quite literally zero relationship to the actual world of the legal profession. And it reverted to all of these sort of Perry Mason cliches that I thought the mass education in what an actual trial looks like that the OJ trial gave America. I thought that those were at least, if not gone for good, refined somewhat, to adhere to what the actual internal dynamics of a courtroom are. This show makes no gesture to that at all. This could have been made in 1955, with Raymond Burr saying, but aren't, jumping up from the defense attorney's chair, bench and saying, but sir, isn't it true that you, and then making some sort of surprise factual assertion. I mean, the whole thing is
that sounds so great to me.
it's so incredibly absurd the way she worms her way into this law firm. It's just nonsense. It really is like catching a rerun of the old Matlock. And then this cake and eat it too twist makes her seem like a bit like a sociopath, but it's kind of torqued so that it's not. It's both her conscience as a parent and a social crusader, but it's like those two things don't go together at all. I could watch 2 of them, and then a third was just totally out of the question. I get nothing out of this product.
All right, Dana, you gotta split the difference here.
I mean, nothing Steve says is wrong, but I guess that doesn't leave me feeling bitterness toward the show. I mean, when is the last time? When is the last time there was a representation of a courtroom anywhere? I just feel like.
Oh, but just a little verisimilitude. You're not even just a gesture towards verisimilitude.
I don't know. I guess the kind of show that this show is not going to have realistic, right? No, I don't think that any kind of legal procedural in which there's a case of the week is not going to have somebody bursting in with new information from a secret witness at the last minute, because that is how you dramatize court trials on television. This show almost seems, although it doesn't really resemble it externally, like it belongs in the world of Scandal, right? The long-running kind of soap opera, legal detective drama that also took place in a completely fantastical and unreal world in which everyone was way too good looking, but was massively popular and beloved because it knew what kind of show it was and kind of dug its teeth in. I agree, Steve, that this is not going to be my kind of show. I did make it through 3 episodes. I don't feel the need to watch any more, but this show is being touted and talked about as, sort of a sign that network television is not in its final death throes, and therefore a good sign for the kind of TV ecosystem at large. And I don't disagree with that. Like, if actors like Kathy Bates get to have big fat roles that try to do new things, which I think arguably this show does, even if those things are two conventional things. It's putting the two conventional things together, right? It's putting the drama of the week legal show in with this longer arc show that's about, I mean, we won't get into everything it's about, but as Julia said, is to some degree about social justice and about Matlock realizing her own personal ambitions sort of through the job. And that's an interesting thing for a show to do. I don't know. I guess I feel so wishy-washy because what I'm basically saying is if this is your kind of thing, you should give it a try. And I think Julia, whose kind of thing it is, would agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other interesting context here is to kind of look at what's happening to network shows at this moment, which is so complicated for streaming, right? Like the shift towards cable and a slight broadening of what got made, that created economically profitable businesses for the people who were making those shows. The advance into streaming was essentially speculative, right? Like the companies were like, what if we make a show for everybody? What if we let 1,000 flowers bloom? What if we make 20,000 niche shows of varying qualities that we put across a gajillion networks? Hollywood can't actually afford to do that. There is not a business model that will let it do that, which means we're headed for a contraction and for the making of fewer things. And the question of what's going to get made and how is it going to get made and what lessons from the streaming diffusion are going to get pulled back into a slightly more constrained set of shows that get made is part of what interests me here. Like, this is not the same procedural that would have been made 20 years ago by a long shot in terms of kind of the diversity of the cast, the experimentation with tone. I mean, I do see it also reminded me of Scandal, not just because one of the lawyers who Maddie Matlock is working for is a extremely elegant, smart, and capable Black woman named Olympia, rather than Olivia as in Scandal. But there's, I think, kind of an intentional allusion there, maybe. But there's a tonal experimentation here, which may or may not work. Like, I agree that the person that Kathy Bates' character has to be conducting herself in the way that she's conducting herself is like a, completely demented person, like, which we'll see how that unfolds and how the show kind of handles that. It seems to sort of begin to address it and give it some emotional weight, which I think is probably the better path than just blithely pretending that it's not a bit daffy. I don't know. We're, for better or for worse, Steve, I don't know if we're headed back to lowest common denominator, but we're headed back to fewer shows made for more people. And if this is part of what that's going to produce, I don't feel pessimistic about that. I'm here for it.
I think in an admirably gentle and populist way, you're abstracting out your judgment of this show from your own actual reaction to it. But maybe I'm projecting something onto you because the show is dumb. It's dumb. The portrayal, I mean, the scenes in her home life, again, not to give anything away, I won't go into it, are unbelievably thinly drawn. They're both thin and broad and mawkish and grating beyond belief. It's a time capsule from a previous era of television making. And I'll just note that it's a hit. I mean, the economics of the industry are in disarray right now. This thing has about somewhat under 8 million viewers to it. I can't tell you enough about, how you can monetize ad eyeballs in 2024 to tell you whether 8 million viewers. But, that's considerably less than The Good Wife had. And of course, going back 30, 40 years, it's a tiny fraction. So I don't feel any compulsion to root for the show because it makes no difference to me whether its success allows for anything more like it, if anything, the opposite.
Oh my God, this show has achieved the resurrection of Steve, the old-fashioned crank.
It's just a terrible TV show. I mean, it's just that by the standards of the people listening to this podcast, to abstract it away from me for a second, it's a terrible TV show.
I mean, this is a difference of opinion so stark that I think listeners are going to want to watch the show just to know who they agree with. So you just got the ratings of this show even higher, Steve.
This show is full of charming performances and a self-aware whimsy that I found delightful, along with 8 million Americans.
You will never watch one more minute.
No, because my kids are super into it, and we just finished Bad Monkey. I think it's going to become a family watch.
I wanted to stay on the air now just for that, just so Julia's twins have a fun show to watch.
Just so Julia has to watch every minute of it. That is the Dante-esque punishment.
Your Honor, I fail to see the relevancy of Mrs. Slayton's writing career.
Your Honor, the only thing we know about this woman is her writing career. I gotta start somewhere. Sit down, David.
Mr. Matlock.
This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know that you can lock in 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve recently announced a big rate cut, and there could be more rate cuts this year and into 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest you earn on your cash. So if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade bonds, check out Public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up, and once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments even as rates decline. Lock in 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com/culture. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA and SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info.
Have you heard who the latest power couple is? Well, you won't see this coming. It's Discover and Cashback. Feeling let down? You won't be when you hear how Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. All with no sign-up required and no limit to how much they'll match. See, isn't that a couple you want to root for? It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Back in January of this year, when the music website Pitchfork had its staff gutted by layoffs and was made a subsidiary of the men's magazine GQ after almost 25 years on the web, we dedicated a segment of this show to memorializing that massively influential publication. Now, 5 writers and editors from Pitchfork have launched a new digital magazine called Hearing Things. It's a worker-owned platform that will rely on subscriptions rather than advertising, on the model of Defector, 404 Media, Flaming Hydra, other sites that have sort of emerged from the wreckage of the cultural web as we knew it to create something new. Hearing Things just launched last week. We spent some time poking around the site, reading various things, taking a look at the masthead, and getting a sense of what the magazine might be. And we gather together now to talk about it. Julia, I'm going to start with you because you are the editorial brain of the three of us who has actually run a digital magazine. I'm so curious what you think about this magazine from the ground up, like the design, the writing, the choice of what they write on. Whole deal. Tell me what to think, because I don't read a lot of music criticism, so I'm not quite sure what to compare it to.
Well, I'm a huge admirer of a number of the journalists who have put this site together. And I obviously, as a regular voice on this show, am a practitioner and fan of the idea of cultural criticism. And I think my main reaction to this site is just how stubbornly out of time it is to, in the year 2024, assert that there is room on the web for quirky musings in the written form. And I really liked a lot of the quirky musings. There's a very funny post on the site about one writer's obsession with Ed Sheeran's jumble of tattoos. There's an interesting reported piece with a little scooplet about negotiations and legislation in Congress attempting to protect concert goers from scalpers and Ticketmaster and various extortive ticket schemes, and sort of how cynical and poorly conceived a lot of those are, and how easily influenced our legislators sometimes are. And then, of course, there are reviews and assessments of new music, conversations with producers about what makes music interestingly and well produced, a list of the 100 most interesting songs of the decade so far. You know, everything you might expect there to be on a music site, and also everything you wouldn't expect a new media venture in 2024 to be. You know, I was never a diehard Pitchfork fan, and I think I've spoken many times on the show about how I found music criticism as a form kind of alienating because it assumed a bunch of references I didn't have, and I actually prefer romping through the algorithm and my own little playgrounds of streaming apps as my form of music discovery. But I do love and know a lot of people who love this kind of criticism, and it was really interesting to spend time in it and feel like the comfortable embrace of, I don't know, the OG web, like people defiantly trying to make a kind of journalism that is no longer current happen again. So I have a lot of admiration for the site, but I'm curious what you guys made of it.
Okay, Steve, I'm going to bounce over to you because I think you do read more music criticism than me. Is this a site you would return to find new things?
To be determined. I hope it is. I really loved Pitchfork and got a lot out of it. Also out of allmusic.com, which had been there forever, hired actually quite good writers for the generic title of the site, went across every form of music and created this unbelievable library of blurbs, artist biographies, and it was just guided me through, you know, the next phase of my music education. And they both have been kind of gutted and now are just, you know, they're just kind of wandering the horizon like a ghost ship or something. So I really hope Hearing Things succeeds. I like the way they state their mission, which is that something is getting lost in between the kind of corporate monoculture that produces global megastars, because journalism is now so SEO driven, sucks up an enormous amount of prose and attention, versus the sort of Borgesian infinite library, you know, of the algorithm. And so you kind of lose one part of the music audience to Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish and on and on and on, the obvious names. And another part, as Julia does, and as I do too, and most of us probably do to some degree, is just the algorithm making suggestions or, you know, kind of clicking through from one song to another on Spotify. And that's a pretty big crack to fall through. I mean, it would be remarkable if those really claimed every part of musical self-awareness. But my question is, I'm curious what the sensibility of a site like this is going to be now that the rock snobbery that gave rise to Pitchfork and arguably music criticism as we know it now is so discredited, obviously for being rooted in a certain kind of person, typically a young, snotty white boy. And obviously music criticism evolved very, very far from that in the interim. But nonetheless, it's incumbent upon something like this to what's a function of a website like this, right? It's not just informational or thumbs up or thumbs down, or they've discarded with the 10-point rating scale of Pitchfork, probably a good thing. But ultimately it succeeds or fails because it allows a certain kind of audience to take shape and achieve some kind of enhanced self-recognition and coherence in and through the publication. This is true of any publication that exceeds. It defines the slatiness of Slate. It defines the New Yorker-ness of the New Yorker, and on and on and on. And it definitely defined Pitchfork, even though Pitchfork took a certain kind of criticism about rock snobbery to heart and made itself way more eclectic. At its heart was always its origin in a certain reverence for indie rock and everything that sort of spoked off from that. And the challenge facing Hearing Things is if they go too eclectic, which is the direction they seem inclined to go in, they may not have that defining sensibility. And of course, if they are anything like a throwback to the early Pitchfork, which made Pitchfork, it's just a dinosaur and an anachronism, and it's a no-go. So I had trouble finding its personality, which doesn't mean I won't find things on that site, which I did. Incredibly interesting, well-written, intelligent people are behind it. I admire it. But absent a defining sensibility, I won't just go there as a default and see what's up at Hearing Things.
You know, I think that this might actually be the rare music publication that I would click on just to see what they're writing about as a non-reader of music criticism in general and a non-listener usually during most of the year when I'm not listening to the Summer Strut playlist for that part of the show. I'm not listening to a ton of new pop. But yet, when I clicked over to Hearing Things to see what I could see, the very first article I came across, I believe it was on the cover of the site at that moment, was about Anora. Did you guys read the article about the song Greatest Day, which is used twice in Anora. It's sort of the big needle drop of Anora. It comes up twice in the movie, and it's the song you come out, kind of tapping your toe to. And it's this little exploration into where that song comes from, who remixed it from this 1990s boy band that it originally came from, and why that remix works so well in the movie. And it's a really nice piece of music criticism that I wanted to mention also, though, because I think that there's a blind spot in that piece that makes me think about the old Pitchfork, Steve, or just, blind spots that publications can have and need to address later on down the line. And it has to do not with music criticism, but with being aware of the movie that you're writing about and the people who made it. And this was specifically on my mind because I had just interviewed, as I mentioned in our Anora segment, Sean Baker and Samantha Kwan, who's his wife and co-producer and, involved in all of the movies he makes. All right. So in the last paragraph of this lovely piece on the Greatest Day, Needle Drop in Anora, the writer mentions her and calls her only his wife. Let me find the sentence. Hilariously, Baker and his wife semi-randomly found the song on Spotify when they searched for tracks with the name Greatest Day. And then I went back through the piece word by word to try to see, like, wait a minute, did they ever explain who Samantha Kwan is and what her role was in making the movie? And they don't. So that seemed like a moment to me when, some of the sexism that Pitchfork in its sort of raucous days was accused of was kind of unconsciously rearing its head. And I'm sure that is not, the critic trying to ignore Samantha Kwan, but it's a case of a critic not digging deeply enough into everything that they're talking about to sort of figure out the backstory, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, now you're making me feel protective of this tender new site, just looking at it from an entrepreneurial perspective, because I agree they definitely should have put that in there. But it's also just so hard to make anything new at this point. And it's so hard to staff it. And it's so hard to have enough editors to read everything carefully enough to catch and support writers by making sure they don't make mistakes like that. And so I don't want to stomp on the bravery of the group behind this just because not every piece is completely flawless. I know that's not what you're trying to do either, Dana. And I'm sure this group aspires to get that kind of thing right. But I part of what's interesting to me about it, and we've talked about Substack over the years, we've talked about newsletters, I forget how recently we've talked about them, but it's like the model that seems to work is to start a newsletter. And this is not a newsletter, this is a website. Now the set of collective websites you mentioned, and to that I'd add Hellgate, which is a really terrific local news site in New York, is a really exciting and interesting model too. So it's not like they're completely off the beaten path of experiments and business model. But the kind of newsletter that makes a specific promise about what it's going to deliver to you on a specific cadence feels like the form in which a lot of people are consuming text these days. And so I think it's an interesting choice to go for a website. And maybe it's just that it's a 5-person team of founding editors who want more voices in there, in part because music is so vast that if you have just one voice guiding you through it, there's no way to bring kind of expertise to the mix. I compared this site to what is currently on Pitchfork, which does still exist. And both sites had playlists of the 100 best songs of the decade so far. And I compared those lists, and it was very interesting because kind of contra to the old Pitchfork vibe, the Pitchfork list was a lot poppier and had a lot more songs that I'd heard of and included most of the artists that I would assume would be included. And I felt like I learned a lot more from the Hearing Things list. And although my habit of music consumption is not to seek out that kind of journalism, I actually really love it. Like when I was at the LA Times, the music crew there always did an annual list of the songs of the year that I would just pop into Spotify and make a few discoveries. And our friend of the program, Jody Rosen, has done that at various points. So I like a playlist. That's a service to me. But the notion of spreading out a smorgasbord of offerings and letting people sample as they like rather than curating it into some kind of regularly cadenced dose in the newsletter vibe is such an interesting and difficult choice in this environment, I think. And so I'm very curious to see kind of how they expand and build from where they are. And I think, with subscription, if you can get a few loyalists to support what you're up to, and I do think the OG Pitchfork has a lot of loyalists who might follow these writers and editors, you don't actually need that many subscribers to make something stable. It's hard to make something that can grow and can fund all the fact checking you might want, but it does seem possible to get to some level of commitment of coverage. And I think that's really exciting to see.
Well, at the risk of being called a dream stomper, I will say that I'm really glad the site exists. Really want it to do well. Maybe for similar reasons to Steve will scorn me once more, to the reason that I would like the Kathy Bates show to do well, because it is different and new and trying to be itself. And I think it is doing a good job at that. And I want to mention something else I think it does well. Julia, I wonder if you'll agree with me as a design nerd. I think it just looks really clean. It's really nice to read a site that isn't cluttered with ads, which of course the subscription model allows for. There's a lot of white space on the page. It's just easy to scroll through and want to read and not feel like you're being attacked by pop-ups, etc. So that part of it is very promising.
Yes, and it's a great logo as well.
Yeah, here. I do not feel about this the way I feel about Matlock. I hope it thrives.
All right, here on Hearing Things. It's better than the new Matlock. And you can find it online at hearingthings.com.
Have you heard who the latest power couple is? Well, you won't see this coming. It's Discover and Cashback. Feeling let down? You won't be when you hear how Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match, all with no sign-up required and no limit to how much they'll match. See, isn't that a couple you want to root for? It pays to discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Well, we've reached the time in our show when we discuss le business. Steve, what have we got this week?
Our one item of business, Dana, this week is to tell you about the Slate Plus, a Slat Plus bonus episode. It's available to Slate Plus members in their feeds. This week, we're talking about Halloween costumes, our own history with them, our kids' history with them, our philosophy of them. It promises to be a rollicking good time. If you are not a Slate Plus member, guess what? You can't listen to it. You'll never know. You'll never know how we feel about Halloween and the costumes. But if you were to sign up today at slate.com/culture plus, you would know. Members get ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just mentioned. You also get to hear members-only programming from other Slate shows like Slow Burn and Political Gabfest. Members get unlimited access to all the great writing on slate.com. You will never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. I should mention that you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. And here I'm going to go off script and just tell you from the heart, it is a loyalty world we're living in now. It means a lot to us that you listen to our show. And if you were to subscribe to Slate Plus, it helps us do what we do and keep the lights on and keep thriving. So please sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Again, that's slate.com/culture plus. Or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, Dana, back to you.
All right. Well, we've reached the moment in the show when we endorse. Steve, I'm going to start with you in revenge for all the many times that you've started with me. You're probably scrambling through various possible endorsements in your mind. But what did you experience in culture this week that you want to tell us about?
False, Dana. I actually found mine several days ago and remembered to put it in a Word document. So back when I was 15 years old, I interned at a summer stock theater in Connecticut. And when I showed up, I was thrust into a bit part, non-speaking part. I literally was a warm body standing in the background in a production of Man of La Mancha. And musicals, man, they packed them in summer theater. And the whole thing was larger than life. It was one of the few times in my life I felt like I was in a movie. For the entire 3 months I was there, an exhilarating and weird milestone in my life. I haven't encountered the musical Man of La Mancha since then, even though it wended its way into my consciousness. And I knew all the songs. I knew every beat of that musical by heart by the end of its, I think, 3-week run or whatever it was. A friend of mine and I were recently reminiscing about that summer who went with me. And I was like, God, I just wonder how that music holds up. And I started listening to it. And it is what it is. It's a, corny musical from that era, which can be great. And I started researching. I was like, I don't even really know. Is this it's not like a Rodgers and Hammerstein? Is it how canonical is it? I started doing research on it and, found out interesting things. But by far, the most interesting thing I found out about it is that the original lyricist for Man of La Mancha was supposed to be W.H. Auden, the great
What?
English poet. Yeah. You heard me. And and he got fired because it was too caustic and kind of anti-bourgeois. And I was like, really? And so there's a surviving fragment, and I just want to read some of it. Ladies and gentlemen, you've made the most remarkable progress, and progress, I agree, is a boon. You have built more automobiles that are parkable, crashed the sound barrier, and may very soon be setting up jukeboxes on the moon. But I beg to remind you that despite all that, I, Death, still am and always will be cosmocrat. Still sport with the young and daring. At my whim, the climber steps upon the rotten boulder. The undertow catches boys as they swim. The speeder steers onto the slippery shoulder. With others, I wait until they're older before assigning, according to my humor, to one a coronary, to one a tumor. Liberal my views upon religion and race, tax posture, credit rating, social ambition, cut no ice with me. We shall meet face to face. Despite the drugs and lies of your physician, the costly euphemisms of your mortician, Westchester matron and Bowery bum, both shall dance with me when I rattle my drum. Now that's a Broadway musical I want to see.
Oh my God. This is why you don't program CBS procedural, Steve.
It is definitely why I don't. And it's why when I wake up in hell, that will be my job title. But but anyway, I will link to these snippets.
Wait, Steve, this gives me a great idea for a plus segment. We have a different one planned for this week, but we should all describe the various roles that we played in school plays.
Oh,
or like camp plays, like us as actors. What did we do, and how good or bad were we? I feel like that would be a really fun.
Oh my God! Oh, I could write a novel about that. Oh my God!
All right.
Okay, Julia, what have you got?
All right. This week, I want to report back on Dan Coyce's new book, Hampton Heights, which I hyped without having read last time we had him on the show. But now I have read it, and it is such a lovely, strange, beautiful, almost dreamlike book. It's a very appropriate book to read around our plus topic of Halloween because it's got kind of spooky elements, but all delivered in a mild and tender and really interesting and original way. So anyhow, Hampton Heights, it's very good. You should check it out.
All right, my endorsement this week is Julia-esque in the sense that it's food and cooking related. I feel like somehow when people share recipes on this show, it's often Julia who starts the chain going. Before I get to this recipe, I have to give the biographical note that we in my household just got a new oven after having had a very, very janky old oven for way too long. And so I'm having this renaissance of wanting to use my oven to bake things because for the first time, I don't have to wait sometime between an hour and 90 minutes for the oven to get hot enough. And I found a very, very simple recipe, like for nights when you really just want to throw two things on a sheet pan and put it in the oven. And there's infinite variations that are delicious. It's a Mark Bittman recipe, who we've talked about before on the show. He's kind of the minimalist among the various chefs writing for the New York Times. This recipe is for roasted cod and potatoes. I've made it a few times now with variations, and it has 4 ingredients. Chunks of cod, which can be basically frozen when you start, just slightly thawed, sliced potatoes, and olive oil and salt and pepper. Those are the only ingredients for the dish, although you could spice it up in all kinds of various ways and throw in paprika or various spices if you want it to be a little more kicky. You can also just have it with hot sauce. Anyway, it's super simple and easy to make. And here is the hack that I've discovered with this recipe. Make a double recipe. The next day, you'll have a whole bunch of cold cod and potatoes, and you can make a delicious German potato salad just by throwing in some capers, some chopped celery, onions, whatever, throw in some vinaigrette dressing, and you have a delicious lunch for the next day. So that is my endorsement. And I also, in celebration of my new wonderful oven that we got just in time for Thanksgiving, want to ask our listeners to send me very simple recipes you can make in the oven. What is your favorite? Throw it in the oven and think about it no more type of recipe. And I'll try some of them and report back on the show.
Dana, I have one that I'm pretty sure I endorsed a couple years ago, but it is like a sheet pan dinner to end all sheet pan dinners. And it's very seasonally appropriate, which is the New York Times. It's sausage, new potatoes, and Brussels sprouts. And you basically make this kind of like honey mustard glaze and onion and almonds. So you sort of throw all those ingredients, cover them with oil, salt, and pepper, throw them in and broil the crap out of them or roast the crap out of them for like 20 minutes. And then with 10 minutes to go, you glaze the whole thing with this honey mustard glaze and then toss some raw chopped almonds on top to finish it off. And they all just roast a bit. And it is so freaking good and easy and like such a great oven dish. So I'm pretty sure I've endorsed that before, but we'll toss the link to that on the show page again. And in fact, I haven't made that in like a year, and maybe I'm going to make it tonight.
All right, let's put both of those recipes linked on the show page this week, and hopefully we'll get some more in from listeners.
I have a third. The roasted kale and sweet potatoes with eggs is effectively a one sheet that you then, it's also on the Times cooking app, but they turn it into a bowl by putting it over farro, but it's a really, really nice one sheet.
There we go. We're 3 recipes in already. This is great. I'm going to compile a whole bunch, and my new oven shall be used in all its glory. I guess that does it for this week's Slate Culture Gabfest. You will find links to some of the things we talked about today, including those 3 recipes, on our show page, slate.com/culturefest. You can always email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our producer is Jared Downing. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. And the composer of our theme song is Nicholas Britell. For Stephen Metcalf and Julia Turner, I'm Dana Stevens saying thanks so much for being a listener, and we'll talk to you again next week.
They're burying me and you're just sitting there.
I've spent more years in a courtroom than you've been alive. But there's one thing I've never done in a courtroom, and that's just sit there.
Hi, we're All Modern. We believe designing your space should be easy and simple. At All Modern, we have the best of modern furniture and decor all in one place. With styles from Scandi and mid-century to minimalist and maximalist, every design is hand-vetted for quality by our team of experts. And did we mention fast plus free shipping? That means you can upgrade your space in days, not weeks. That's modern made simple. Shop now at allmodern.com.